Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of L&D Unboxed, the podcast where we explore bold ideas and transformative stories from today's most inspiring voices who have been working on the future of work, learning, and humanity. I'm your host, Ujjwal, and I bring strategy and heart to the world of human resources. And also a strategic advisor with StratBeans, where we design learning experiences for better business growth and impact. So let's get on with today's episode. Today's episode is the 2026 CEO Playbook, balancing growth, profitability, sustainability, and AI transformation. So as we move towards 2026, CEOs are navigating, I think, one of the most complex leadership landscapes in the recent history. Growth is back on the agenda, but so is profitability. Sustainability is no longer optional. You know, it used to be done for just reporting reasons many years back, but I don't think it's the same now. And speed still matters a lot. And to top it all, AI has moved from experimentation to expectation. And that also without a clear playbook on how to lead it responsibly to scale. So today's CEOs have a task at hand. They have to choose. It's not that they have to choose between growth or discipline, innovation or responsibility. I think they're expected to deliver all of that, and that too simultaneously. So today, I can't think of a better person to explore this with me than the guest, Tian Chong Ng, also fondly known as TC. A leader who has operated at scale across global markets, led transformation in highly competitive environments. TC is a CEO and non-executive director with more than 30 years of leadership experience across telecom, technology, infrastructure, and enterprise services. He's currently the CEO of Singtel Singapore, leading the group's flagship operating company. And before Singtel, TC has spent 3 very successful decades with Hewlett-Packard. I want to say in many senior roles, but the last role which TC was with HP was as President and Managing Director for Asia Pacific. He has also served in the Singapore Armed Forces as a colonel. TC also currently serves as a board member and non-executive director at a few organizations. So I'm so delighted, and it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, TC. Welcome.
Thank you, Ujjwal. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for the kind introduction.
Wonderful. So let's get this conversation started, TC, and I'm sure you have so much experience, which is going to add value to our to the leaders and everybody else who's going to be listening to this podcast. So I want to start by zooming out a little bit, that when you look ahead at 2026, what feels fundamentally different about a CEO roles as compared to the last few years?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think that's a very apt and relevant question for the current times. I'll start by saying that what feels very different in 2026, and why I say apt and relevant is especially now with the Middle East situation going on. I'll say that today versus a couple of years ago, the main difference is CEOs are leading in a period where there's a polycrisis environment. And why I say polycrisis, because there's been a series, right, over the last couple of years of many things that are not on a predictable cycle. We talked about COVID, the disease cycle, supply chain volatility, and then of course the geopolitical fractures that are happening. The Ukraine, Russia, the European situation, and then most recently now the Middle East situation started with Israel, Gaza, and then now of course what we have at hand in Iran. And of course, there's also in the background the climate crisis, going on. So all of these things are happening in no fixed cycle, one after the other. And so I think what's fundamentally different is because of this polycrisis, CEOs have to get used to the uncertainty and the pressure that comes along with it. And therefore, business complexity is also increasing, where there's all kinds of crises. In fact, we talk about COVID, the supply chain shortage. Guess what? Here we are again, right? Chip, memory shortage, prices going up, and then of course oil prices going up. And that has both direct and indirect bearing depending on what industry you're in. Like for me, that means utility cost is going up. If we did not hedge, for example, our utility bills, then we are power consuming in a lot of infrastructure. So it has indirect bearing. So I think that's one of the big differences. CEOs have to have the mindset to be able to manage in a situation when so many uncertain things are happening. And I think the apt word to describe it is polycrisis. So that's one of the things that I see. And the way I've discussed this topic, Ujjwal, with many of my industry peers,
Yeah.
is that in the past, I have talked about this notion where we grew up in a world in the last 30 years that I've worked or more, where people said that, look, as you become more and more senior and you do these roles, they drew the analogy of being, you don't need to be an expert at everything, but as long as you are like a symphony conductor, as long as you can get people to work together, and you got good skills at it, you're okay. But because of the polycrisis environment, I think the analogy to me has changed to one where what's different now is leaders is not good enough to be a good conductor of a symphony. Now they need to be a jazz band leader where there's no script, right? And then the scenario changes when, if you follow jazz bands, right? The jazz band leaders are one where they are still calm, even though there's no script, because then the idea here is you go with the flow and you allow each of your band members to shine, at the right time, and you can draw out the best. So in a way, the thing is not about control, but also creating the conditions, right, for this collective playbook where people can come together. Okay, so I've said quite a lot, but I think the biggest change for me is really about the background situation and how leaders need to adapt now. And then, of course, there's a few other things in my mind, what's the difference? We can talk about that as well.
Yeah, no, very rightly said, TC. With what is happening, the geopolitical scenario, along with what happens in-house and the external environment, I mean, CEOs are now juggling many more balls. And I think that, to actually focus on what is going to create future value is also so important for CEOs now, looking at, how the geopolitical environment will impact whichever industry that you're working in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think CEOs need to kind of multitask a lot more than they were, because I think for many years, growth and profitability were treated as somewhat trade-offs. And how do you now see the leading CEOs with larger organizations balancing both in today's environment, that, you do not have to compromise one for the other?
Yeah. The way I look at it when you ask that question is linked to a second topic, which I see CEOs increasingly have to manage, right? Which is the AI transformation, right? Because in this underlying all of this sea of change, that we have to manage, we also have to now contend with the expectation, right? That as the AI and the technology behind the AI starts to, seep in to every part of our organization, the CEOs or senior leaders have to also lead this AI transformation. And therefore, when you ask me the question, is growth and profitability treated as trade-offs? I think in today's case, in a way, if I start with the AI transformation first, I think the AI transformation is something which in a polycrisis environment, whether whatever shows up, the CEOs have to start dealing with it. And as you deal with it, then you realize that actually, um, in a way, when we deploy the AI, they actually reinforce as well, the growth. So they are not contradictory in that sense. We have to deal with the change, and you have to deal with both growth and profitability measures. And it's not just about cost out, but it's also being able to attack things sharper,
Yeah.
right? And do it with more insights and all that. So at Singtel, for example, right, the business and team that I lead, We are also while dealing with the poly crisis, we are in the midst of a huge AI transformation. And I think, as you mentioned in your intro of me, at Singtel, we have three roles to AI. We are an adopter of AI, we build the AI, and we enable AI. All right, we build the AI through a sister company called NCS, but we enable it through another company called Nexera, where we build data centers. In fact, we offer through Re-AI, what we call GPU as a service. But as we do this, the AI transformation, as the leading adopter, I'm working on more than 20 use cases, right, across the entire company. And it is about using AI to transform Singtel to be an AI-first telco of the future, where our vision is to be the world's most intelligent connectivity company, where AI is going to power all our customer interaction, all our network decisions, our growth engines, as well as our customer employee experience. And while doing that, we are going to drive for growth because we are able to do it in a very intelligent and hyper-personalized way, where we're able to do sharper targeting to serve up the right offer at the right time, in the right tonality, the right medium, the right message, all of those things to drive growth, right? And because we're able to grow, we can drive both growth and profit. But the AI transformation also allows us to be very productive because we are also working on a lot of productivity scenarios to help our employees. And so, therefore, what I'm saying is that they both can be balanced in today's environment, using that as an example to the question that you asked. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolute sense. And I think that, I know for a fact that you are leading the AI transformation at Singtel, from the front. So lots of times one hears that, there is an AI function or a department which has been created and there is a team, which is focusing on that. But in your case, I know that you are personally leading the AI transformation at Singtel. So I mean, this just comes to mind, TC, that from a CEO's perspective, what does a good AI transformation actually look like? I mean, what are some of the indicators where you would see that, yes, this we have worked on this transformation and Singtel is now ready with AI from an employee perspective?
I think for me, like I said, right, first of all, it starts with a strong vision, where a CEO need to be able to be very clear, at the end, it's an ongoing journey, right? But with our AI transformation, for me, we want Singtel to be the world's most intelligent connectivity company, where AI is powering all our customer interactions from consumer, SMB to enterprise, where AI is powering all the decisions on our network, as well as all our employee experience. Now, these are very big statements, but inside of this statement, what success looks like, I'll give you a few examples. In the networks area, we're using AI on what we call, our goal is to hit level 4 autonomy for autonomous network, where we want our networks, and I'm talking very complex, the mobile network, where there's a RAN, radio antenna network, and the core behind it, where we want autonomous network means our network is able to achieve self-configuration capabilities, self-optimization, right? And be able to do self-healing as well in the event something goes wrong. Now, again, networks usually are the areas where we spend the biggest OPEX and CAPEX for telcos because it's a big infrastructure. And if we're able to achieve autonomous network, it will mean a flatter structure, less people, but also then we free up our people to do more value-added tasks. But these are also very important because this AI in operations matter to us so that when an outage happens, we can triage faster. And so our vision is somewhere in there, what the success looks like, successful AI transformation in autonomous network. It means that we can achieve, for example, a 1-5-10 vision. It means 1 minute, we know there's an error in the network. Within 5 minutes, we're able to tell what the root cause is. And within 10 minutes, or the appropriate goal over there, we're able to return to operations and fix the error. Now, all this, right, in a very complex situation, used to take hours. But with AI and building of digital twins within AI, we are able to triage faster and achieve visions like that. And that is what, for example, success looks like if we're able to implement this across the company, but particularly in the networks area, right? And of course, for me, a successful implementation, if I talk broadly across the company, would mean that I'm able to, I spoke about the operations part around network. We're
Yeah.
able to improve net promoter score. Our customers will be much more happier because Singtel is able to be proactive and be able to solve things before they even raise a ticket or raise an incident, because we know about the issue and we're able to serve customers in a highly contextualized way. And our vision at Singtel is to be able to build an AI roadmap where all our customers are coming into the company in an omni-channel manner. All our customers will contact my company, for example, on an app, through the portal, coming in through a physical retail shop or WhatsApp correspondence. But all of this, we're able to channel through a federated one front door, customer experience. But then it goes into our AI roadmap where we want to have a orchestrator, a big brain, that understands the context for our customers, because that engine, right, has to be able to help our customers to do what we call a discover, buy, care journey. They are able to discover all things that are Singtel. They're able to buy any combination of products or services from Singtel, or care part as well, raise a ticket for any issue that happens, and we're able to solve it. So we're able to provide a contextualized response, because this master agent deals with many specialist agents behind the scene that goes into our billing systems, our network, and many of what we call the OSS, BSS systems to serve up a contextualized discover, buy, care, seamless experience. So it's a very complex situation, but I hope in the few minutes of articulation, you can see that we're trying to stitch together what success looks like, for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very clearly defined, because when you say 1, 5, 10, right, I'm sure every employee in Singtel would be aware of, this vision and the goal that you and your team are working on. So I always feel that, I mean, AI is, um, people are excited by it, people are scared by it, people are overwhelmed by it. So we see different reactions, right? But you can't escape it, because it has already penetrated in every part of our life. So if it is clarified and there is a very clear vision around how it will be used as an enabler in an organization, TC, and it is being communicated in the same way, I think
Yeah. And
is wonderful.
it is. And in fact, your earlier question, right, was can you balance growth and profitability? And when we look at this investment, because the investments to get to this AI vision is also not small.
Yeah.
It's a big envelope that we have to put together. And I think for CEOs looking at this topic, you frequently have to answer to your stakeholders, the shareholders, the board, what is that investment envelope required to achieve this? And for us, the way we're thinking about it is not every dollar will generate you a short-term return, which is what people are looking for, because they're looking for, if I invest every dollar for you and you're asking for either a double-digit, triple-digit million frequently number, how much return are we getting, right? So that we can decide. But the way we're looking at it now is that actually there are sort of like three kinds of measures, that guide, that inform us. There is a ROI, which is the immediate financial return,
Yeah.
on our projects. And of course, this is what we look for in the uplift to the EBIT in the short 1 year, maybe 2 years view time, 1 to 3 years time frame. EBIT uplift if we invest, right? Either from your revenue up or your cost up. There's also a return on employee, which is the productivity. Once you put in the AI, then you free up people's time, and or do the heavy lifting work and all. But now we're starting to look at a third measure, which is conceptually a bit harder, right? We need to frame it. So we have a return on investment, a return on employee. But the third one is what we call return on the future, which is inside this portfolio of AI initiative. We're also now looking at how certain of these investments are to come up with game-changing, needle-moving initiatives that may not show up in the short-term returns, but fundamentally will help us to change the way we go to market or change the way we sell a product. And that takes a longer time horizon. So, so what we see is essentially when we talk about the balancing of growth as well as bottom line, when it comes to the AI, in order to have a more balanced approach, we look at the short term, the productivity, but also put some level of weight into some return on the future initiative where we want to be able to innovate and have game-changing capabilities in achieving the art of possible for some of our initiative, and that may not have a short-term bang for the buck, right? And we need to also equally invest in that, to give us the long-term advantage for the company. So it's kind of like a balance of these things.
Yeah, and I love this, the return on the future of the organization, right? Because if you want to create future value, right, and for CEOs to actually have that foresight in that what is it that we invest now, because everything is not here and now. I mean, I think you so rightly said, TC. I mean, gone are the days where there was just an immediate ROI that everybody would look at, right? And if you don't get an immediate ROI, or an increase in productivity from an employee perspective, you don't want to make that investment, right? I think that if you're building future, if you're future proofing the organization and you're building organizations to last, then the return to future investment is highly critical.
Yeah, it is important because I think you need some things to show up in the short term so that people do not lose confidence.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you need to balance on the investment in some game-changing area as well, that will take more time. But you need to balance the confidence in the short run and the belief as well as investing for the future. And it's not easy. It's easy to say it, but it's really hard to navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that balance is very critical and important. And it only starts at the top and it comes from the CEO that builds the confidence in that balance as well for the rest of the organization.
That's why it goes back to at the outset, upstream. It starts with if you do an AI transformation, you need a couple of ingredients to cook the dish, right? One is that you need this AI transformation to be CEO led and not buried 2 to 3 layers underneath, right?
Absolutely.
Because this AI transformation, the way I describe it, is going to be like a tsunami affecting every single person in the organization, right? It will impact the workflow, workforce redesign. It will impact fundamentally your scorecard, the KPI. So you have to take the call. Secondly, you need to have a strong vision around it, what you want to achieve, what success looks like, which is what we spoke about.
Mhm.
And also, as you implement it, right, beyond working on the use cases, working on the technology stack that achieves your AI, the third pillar is about the workforce transformation, because
Yeah.
any company of a certain scale would have a few generations of employees, and you need to take them on the journey,
Yeah.
right, of this. You need to fire up the awareness, the belief, the growth mindset, as well as change the nature of their jobs, because the organization chart will also start changing as you evolve the AI. So all of these things, right, have to be C-level led. And so that's what we are doing in my company. And it's been tough, but lots of learning, but very exciting. That's what we're working on.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. And, like you said, 4 generations in any organization, and, some are excited, some are overwhelmed. And to make sure that, these initiatives energize them, tell them that, yes, this is an enabler and not de-energize the organization, I think is also very critical. And also CEOs I'm sure you would be focusing on that from the conversation that we are having. I get that, that because you're personally involved, employee morale about AI being an enabler and making them see the future is also something that you're focusing on. So, TC, I just want to shift gears a little bit from AI and move on to another topic, which is sustainability. Sustainability is also big across organizations now. And earlier, I want to say it was just a reporting requirement, right? So in a lot of organizations where we worked, sometimes they would say that you have to show some initiatives on sustainability and do a sustainability drive. And companies were doing that. And I would think that it was a little bit for the reporting requirement, and and many were genuinely involved as well. But now it has shifted to a leadership lens.
Mm.
right? And how do
Yeah.
you think CEOs should think about sustainability while they're still driving performance and scale?
Yeah, I think for us at Singtel, first of all, what I see is that while many organizations have recently started to dial back some of their sustainability commitments, right, in light with the recent trends and changes. But for us at Singtel, we've in fact continued to focus on sustainability. We continue to lean in on that topic. Why? Because I think the way we look at it is sustainability is not a compliance exercise.
Mm.
It is actually a leadership position that we've taken. And we also see that it is a long-term value driver because the nature of the business that we're in Singtel, we are operating very large critical infrastructure that uses a lot of energy, and we have to be efficient at it and continue to put a lot of effort in thinking through about our choice points around it. And plus, like I explained, at the group level, we have sister companies that build data centers and GPUs as a service. And we're also building AI-ready data centers, and we have to keep thinking about the energy topic as well. So for us, what we've done is as a result of all I've said, sustainability actually is, in fact, a core pillar of our, if I may say it, a 3-year growth plan. It is a core pillar. And sustainability actually has a very active oversight, not just from me and my fellow CEOs within the Singtel group, but also from the board. We're given quite a lot of steer from the board as well. In fact, for Singtel, we are the only Asian telco that have actually publicly came out with a net zero 2045 ambition to be net zero.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Right? We've come out in the open to put a flag, put a flag on the ground, so to speak, and we have actually indicated that. And today, this sustainability goals are actually now integrated into our budgets, the way we look at planning, right? It's integrated into the way we do our infrastructure planning, how we develop our products and solutions, as well as also into our capital allocation, right? And our climate targets are science-based, SBTI as
Mm.
well. So in short, right, Ujjwal, we are not backing down from sustainability. We see sustainability as, in fact, like I said, a long-term value adder for us, and we'll continue to back it very strongly. And for us, actually, the topic, we capture it in a acronym. We call it the 4Ds at Singtel, right?
Okay.
In order to capture the sustainability, the central focus for us, we call it the 4Ds because the first D is for defending, and the defending is about defending the infrastructure, right? Defending the infrastructure, that's what we call it. And then the second D is about decarbonization within our operations. The third is about dematerializing our waste. And then the fourth one is about how Singtel continues to delivering sustainable value. So across our entire supply chain. So these are the 4Ds of how we encapsulate our strategic approach towards sustainability. But if you ask me, right, for us at Singtel, it's not just about sustainability as in climate. It's actually about ESG, where we
Yeah.
spend a lot of time beyond the climate topic in terms of how Singtel, as a local leader in Singapore, plays a big role in the local communities as well. Where we spend a lot of time on closing the digital divide in the silver generation, aging population that we have, and also in the disadvantaged portions of our population, where Singtel's, my colleagues and I spend a lot of time. And we have many programs around the digital divide, where we have many of my colleagues who volunteer weekends on road shows to help senior citizens improve their digital skills, be more aware about anti-scam, and so on and so forth, And we also organize a carnival in Singapore for migrant workers as well, with more affordable phone plans and devices to close the digital divide. And in Singapore, we also spend quite a lot of time, and we're very proud of this, to have this thing called the Singtel Carnival, where we organized a carnival for about more than 2,000 students with special needs in Singapore, where we actually ran the exhibition halls at Changi, and my colleagues put together different games that actually helps the special students use their senses, different senses, to play games and to enjoy, And more than 2,000 of Singtel employees typically volunteer every year to put together the games, and then we organize the transportation, bring 2,000 over special needs students along with their medical infrastructure required for some of them to come in to really feel the love as well as understand how people do care for them, and help them to keep up with the progress and their lives. And then finally, we organize things like art carnivals, for children with special needs as well, and display the artwork. So, like I said, it's just beyond the climate topic. It's really about these topics as well as how we operate with integrity, across all the emerging markets through Singtel's footprint. Uh,
Mhm.
and as you know, right, we work across all the emerging markets in Asia. We touch more than 800 million subscribers through Telkomsel in
Yeah.
Indonesia, AIS in Thailand, Globe in Philippines, and Bharti Airtel in India.
Yeah. No, I think it's, from what I hear, from what you're saying, TC, it seems to be that the culture is one of care, and I'm sure your attrition is fairly low because these things make a lot of difference in creating loyalty and long-term commitment from an employee perspective as well. And the
Yes,
other thing,
and I think we know that people want to work for purpose-led organizations,
yeah,
and they find
absolutely.
more meaning, right? And while we embark on AI and we fight in a very competitive market like most big companies, but in a four-generation workforce, the reason why we have four generations is because we do have very loyal employees who really enjoy the fact that they are adding, real purpose back to the community. And for Singtel, we're in a very privileged and special position because we have the Singapore in our name, so to speak, So we feel proud that we're part of the community and we want to be able to lead the way as well.
Yeah. So it showed like it's creating impact, right? To create impact, just outside of the workspace into the community at large is a big thing for organizations. And you were talking about sustainability, TC, as one of your key pillars. And I was just thinking that, a few years back, the sustainability mandate would always come from the West, right? For global organizations that, you need to focus on sustainability, have a few initiatives and do this day and that day, and to make sure that you're spending enough hours in the community. But Asian organizations like Singtel, to make sure that that is so well integrated and entrenched into the fabric of the company, and to have it as one key pillar is very encouraging. And it's really good to hear when you hear Asian companies taking on that mandate and doing a lot to create that impact.
Yes,
So
indeed. Yes, indeed. You're absolutely right. And like I said, for a Singapore Inc. company, Singapore is our home country, and because we are leading a technology company, we do want to play our part to be able to give back to the community and also use our tech and our know-how, to close this digital divide. That is really meaningful for us. Mm.
yeah. So, you see, with all these forces at play, I mean, we spoke about AI, we spoke about growth, profitability, sustainability, and CEOs are now juggling a lot of balls, and in addition to creating an impact in society as well. What, according to you, becomes the most important human capability, I want to say, for leaders and teams heading into 2026 and beyond?
Yes, I think to bring together the short but very packed dialogue that we've had, I think that the human capability, all of us, and especially leaders, need to think about, with the polycrisis environment, with the tech moving at such a rapid pace, especially with AI, every 2 weeks we're solving a new problems, that didn't happen at that pace before, and also with an aging population, with the fact that we don't want to leave the community behind, all of those things. I think one of the capabilities that I've spoken a lot with my colleagues as well as the industry peers are about the fact that we need to have what we call adaptive leadership, right? And adaptive leadership is about continuous learning, is about having that growth and open mindset, being able to, learn and lead through all these changes and be able to bring along the team with you. And for me, when we talk about adaptive leadership, there are actually four big things that people need to think about under the umbrella of adaptive leadership. One is about encouraging people to have what we call emotional EQ or emotional intelligence. You have to be self-aware, right? You have to be self-aware and empathetic, to what's going on. I think you have to have a degree of that in order to understand that, for example, as AI is taking off, people do feel worried, and you need to feel empathetic towards that, right? And understand the emotions, not just your own emotions, but the emotions of your team members. And I think this awareness would then enable leaders to be able to build trust and then encourage others to open up. So the emotional intelligence is a really important one. And as we go through a lot of different changes, I think fairness and transparency is another important quality that needs to show up under the adaptive leadership. Because I think people understand about changes is inevitable, but what they want leaders to think about is, but are you fair, and are you being open and transparent about it, or you keep all the cards and only show what you want, And I think that's where um, you need clear policy, consistent decisions, fairness, in how you treat people, openly, objectively. I think that's the second important thing under adaptive leadership that one needs to think about. And then, of course, the last two is about the growth mindset, where it's always about investing in people to learn and, keep learning new things. I think that's really important. And then finally, I think for leaders under adaptive leadership, it's about what we call personal integrity. It's about the personal character
Yeah.
where you want to have, you want to get people's trust. Then you need to be transparent. You need to be accountable, and you need to have that quality of people understand that you're saying that you're telling the truth. So I think it's that combination of things, the emotional, the EQ, right? The awareness, then you're able to be fair and transparent, foster the growth mindset, and then lastly is about your leadership personal character. I think all of this are the main ingredients of adaptive leadership. And I think humankind and leaders will be better off if we have that in a polycrisis world where you need a lot of changes, anchored by AI and all that. So those are my thoughts.
No, and you were talking about EQ, and I personally think for a CEO, EQ even scores higher than IQ. I mean, we see
Absolutely.
lot of leaders with a very high IQ, but if the EQ is missing in some way, then I think that really, creates a gap within development, trust, and everything. So I'm a big one on leadership and EQ being a top trait for leaders. So happy to hear you say the same. And the second thing which really struck me, TC, is building trust. So, you spoke about the fact that you don't have to only communicate to them what you want to communicate to them, because people can see through that, right? So to have transparent and consistent communication builds trust. So that is again one of the strong traits I think CEOs and leaders are building and focusing on. And it's wonderful to hear you say that. So I think it's one clear key takeaway from this conversation with UTC is that the 2026 CEO playbook isn't about choosing between priorities, right? I think it's about integrating them. So whether it is growth with discipline, or whether you're doing profitability with purpose, or sustainability with scale, or AI with a heart, with, like we say, a human in the loop. So that's what I picked up as key takeaways from this conversation. And we also know that AI is not as a shortcut, like you said, but it's a capability that
Yeah.
elevates how people think, decide, and lead. And that, to your point, when you said, investing in the future, the return on the future, I love that concept. And I think
Yeah,
AI needs to be looked at, not just enabling us here and now, but how does it elevate our thinking and decision making and our leading processes.
yeah.
So,
Absolutely, Ujjwal. I mean, you phrased it, you summed it well. I believe you can do good and grow at the same time. And I think that you can't sidestep the AI transformation, because if you do, your competitors adopt it, you'll be
yeah,
eaten alive anyway, you know. So you don't have a choice. But if you have
yeah.
to adopt it, then you need those leadership skill sets and also understand the framing and then how you bring people forward, right? So that's how it all comes together. Absolutely.
Absolutely brilliant. TC, thank you for sharing such grounded and thoughtful perspective and on what leadership really demands in the years ahead. And I know that you are leading from the front, so we couldn't have heard it from anyone better than somebody who's in the trenches with the troops. And this goes for you even more because you have been in the Singapore Army, so nobody understands this better. How do you lead the troops from the front? And to our listeners, if this conversation resonated, the real question is not whether your organization is adopting AI or pursuing growth, but how intentionally are you preparing your people and leaders to lead in this new reality? So, TC, thank you once again. Appreciate your time and coming on the show. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Ujjwal, and thanks to all the viewers of this or listeners of this podcast as well. Thank you.
And I know that before I end, I know that you do your own podcast as well, TC. So I'm going to get on and listen to some of your episodes as well.
Indeed, indeed. I have my series of T chats, or TC chats, right, on my LinkedIn as well. So for those of you who are interested, please tune in to my LinkedIn profile. And you see a series of my podcast there as well with various leaders on interesting topics such as these.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, TC.
All right, Ujjwal. Thank you for having me.
Thank
Take care.
you. Take care.
All right, cheers. Bye.